The galaxy had been at war for what felt like an eternity. Two dominant coalitions, both ancient and powerful, were locked in a conflict that spanned across star systems. The Tarvok Alliance and their rivals, the Norvani Dominion, had thrown everything they had into the fight: massive fleets, advanced weaponry, and entire species bred for war. Humanity, though aware of the chaos, had remained on the sidelines, focusing on building their fledgling space colonies and protecting their own. But neutrality had its limits. As the war dragged on, the Tarvok Alliance, desperate for fresh resources and soldiers, turned their gaze toward Earth. To them, humanity was a minor race, technologically behind and relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. Yet the humans possessed something the Alliance needed: numbers. The Alliance had grown weary, their forces depleted after countless battles, and they saw humanity as a convenient solution to their manpower shortage. It wasn't an invitation, it was an ultimatum. The Tarvok delivered their terms to Earth: join the war or face annihilation. Earth's leaders balked at the threat. Humanity had worked tirelessly to avoid being pulled into the galactic conflict, but the choice was no longer theirs to make. They could either send their people to fight in a war that wasn't theirs or risk total destruction. The decision was grim, but inevitable. Humanity would go to war. The Tarvok made it clear from the beginning. They didn't expect much. To them, humans were an unrefined species, their technology crude by galactic standards, and their military experience limited to planetary skirmishes. Humanity had never fought in a space war, and the Tarvok viewed them as expendable. They assigned human forces to the least critical battlefronts, where they could be used as cannon fodder or distractions, while the real soldiers, the elite alien species of the Alliance, handled the important missions. Humanity's reluctance to engage was mistaken for weakness. The Tarvok leadership couldn't fathom why humans had tried so hard to stay out of the war. From their perspective, war was just another aspect of life in the galaxy. Every species had fought its way into relevance at some point, and now it was humanity's turn to prove themselves, or die trying. What the Tarvok didn't realize was that Earth's history was drenched in conflict. From ancient wars that spanned continents to modern battles fought with increasingly destructive weapons, humanity had never been strangers to violence. They hadn't wanted to fight in the Galactic War, not because they were weak, but because they understood better than most the true cost of conflict. They knew that war wasn't something to be entered into lightly. The initial deployment was tense. Human soldiers were scattered across distant outposts, assigned to support positions with little chance of making an impact. Their Tarvok commanders barely acknowledged them, issuing orders with an air of superiority, certain that these humans were nothing more than pawns in a much larger game. But the humans didn't complain. They listened, observed, and prepared themselves for what was to come. Among the human ranks, there was a quiet resolve. They had been forced into this war, but that didn't mean they would face it passively. Earth's military leaders, well-versed in tactics that had evolved over centuries of human warfare, knew that survival wouldn't depend on flashy technology or brute force. It would depend on adaptation, resilience, and exploiting every advantage, no matter how small. The aliens, on the other hand, had become complacent. The Tarvok and the Norvani had been fighting each other for so long that their strategies had grown predictable. Battles were fought by the numbers, with the assumption that superior firepower and advanced technology would always win the day. They had forgotten the chaos that true war could bring, the kind of war humans had mastered over thousands of years. Humanity's introduction to the war came with little fanfare. They were sent to the outer edges of a contested system, tasked with holding a barren, strategically irrelevant planet. The mission was simple: provide cover for the Tarvok forces as they launched an offensive on a nearby Norvani outpost. The human forces were expected to hold their ground for a few hours, long enough for the main assault to succeed, and then fall back. No one anticipated them lasting long. When the enemy arrived, the humans didn't panic. They knew the odds were against them, but retreat wasn't an option. Instead, they fought with a tenacity that took the alien commanders by surprise. Rather than standing in rigid formations or relying on static defenses, the humans adapted to the situation with a flexibility that baffled their Tarvok overseers. They used the terrain to their advantage, setting ambushes in the rocky landscape and drawing the Norvani forces into traps. They communicated efficiently, moving as one fluid unit despite being vastly outnumbered. The humans didn't fight like the other species in the galaxy. They fought with the creativity and unpredictability that came from generations of conflict on Earth. Every battle, every war had taught them something new, and now they were putting that knowledge to use. The Norvani forces were unprepared for this kind of warfare. They had been expecting a simple engagement, an easy victory over an inferior enemy. Instead, they found themselves being outmaneuvered and outwitted at every turn. The humans fought as if their survival depended on it, which, in truth, it did. They used guerrilla tactics, hidden-run strategies, and the kind of quick thinking that only came from centuries of experience in the most hostile environments imaginable. Reports began filtering back to the Tarvok command. The human forces were holding their ground longer than anticipated. They had expected the humans to crumble under the first wave of attacks, but the opposite was happening. The Norvani were being pushed back. At first, the Tarvok commanders dismissed the reports as exaggerations. It was impossible, they thought. The humans couldn't be succeeding where more advanced species had failed. But as the hours dragged on, it became clear that something was happening on that distant battlefield, something they hadn't anticipated. By the end of the first day, the humans had done the unthinkable. They had not only held their position, but they had driven the Norvani forces into retreat. The victory wasn't large in the grand scheme of the war, but it was significant for humanity. It was the first step in proving to the galaxy that they were more than just a minor player forced into a war they didn't want. The Tarvok commanders, still arrogant, but now slightly more wary, took notice. They couldn't deny the results, even if they refused to admit that they had underestimated humanity. But this was only the beginning. For humanity, the battle had just started, and they were ready to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The first battle was over, but the war was far from won. Despite their initial success, humanity's role in the galactic conflict remained precarious. The Tarvok Alliance, still convinced that their victory was a fluke, relegated the human forces to the outermost fringes of the conflict, expecting them to merely hold ground or serve as distractions. But humanity had already tasted the realities of the battlefield, and they weren't about to let that opportunity slip by. Their next deployment sent them to a planet known as Zorith 9, a bleak, desolate place that neither side saw as a priority. It was the perfect place to send forces deemed expendable, and in the eyes of the Tarvok, humanity still fit that category. They thought the human forces would slow down the Norvani advance, nothing more. But the humans saw Zorith 9 differently. Every mission was an opportunity to learn, to adapt, and to prove themselves. The mindset ingrained in Earth's forces wasn't one of survival, it was of dominance. The Norvani, a race known for their brute strength and overwhelming numbers, approached the battlefield with their usual overconfidence. Their commanders viewed the upcoming engagement as little more than routine. They'd crush the humans quickly and move on to more pressing matters. The reports of humanity's surprising resistance in previous battles were dismissed as minor setbacks, anomalies in an otherwise predictable war. But when they landed on Zorith 9, the Norvani found no easy fight waiting for them. The humans had already fortified the landscape, turning the rocky wasteland into a maze of death traps. From the moment the Norvani forces set foot on the planet, they were under attack, but not in the way they expected. Instead of meeting the Norvani head-on, the humans used the planet itself as their weapon. They lured the enemy into narrow ravines, setting off controlled explosions that sent boulders and debris crashing down, cutting off escape routes. Small squads of human soldiers launched quick, precise strikes before vanishing into the terrain, leaving the Norvani confused and demoralized. It wasn't just the tactics that baffled the Norvani, it was the sheer tenacity of the human forces. Where most species might have retreated in the face of the Norvani's superior numbers and brute strength, the humans fought harder, with a level of ingenuity the Norvani weren't prepared for. Earth soldiers had brought with them an arsenal of modified weapons, re-engineered from both human and alien technology. Their plasma rifles fired more accurately, their explosives packed more power, and their communication systems were almost impossible to intercept. Every piece of technology the humans had was a product of adaptation and improvement, making them a far more formidable opponent than the Norvani had anticipated. The human soldiers didn't fight in the same rigid formations that the Norvani were used to facing. Instead, they moved like guerrilla fighters, unpredictable and difficult to track. They coordinated strikes from multiple angles, never staying in one place long enough for the Norvani to mount a proper counterattack. Every time the Norvani thought they had the humans cornered, they found themselves outflanked, ambushed, or bombarded from a position they hadn't considered. The chaos of it all was overwhelming for the Norvani, who relied heavily on direct confrontation and brute force to win their battles. But brute force wasn't enough against the humans. The Norvani quickly realized that they were losing more than just soldiers. They were losing their nerve. The humans had a way of getting into their heads, using the terrain and their unconventional tactics to sow confusion and fear. It wasn't just about killing the enemy, it was about breaking their will to fight. As the battle on Zorith 9 dragged on, the human forces began to push the Norvani back, inch by inch. The Tarvok commanders, watching from afar, were once again taken by surprise. The humans were supposed to be holding the line, delaying the Norvani, but instead, they were winning. Reports from the battlefield described human soldiers fighting with a level of coordination and creativity that was unheard of in the galaxy's history. The Tarvok had always seen warfare as a straightforward contest of firepower and strategy, but the humans were rewriting the rules with every battle they fought. The Norvani, now on the defensive, attempted to regroup, launching a full-scale counteroffensive against the human positions. They deployed their heavy artillery, intending to flatten the human defenses and overwhelm them with sheer numbers. But the humans had prepared for this. They had studied the Norvani's tactics, learning from every skirmish and adapting their defenses accordingly. The artillery bombardment, which should have been a devastating blow, was met with advanced countermeasures. The humans had built underground bunkers and fortifications designed to withstand the bombardment, emerging unscathed once the shelling stopped. Then came the counterattack. The human forces didn't wait for the Norvani to advance. They took the fight directly to them. Using stealth tactics, they infiltrated the Norvani ranks, sabotaging supply lines and communication systems. What started as a planned assault by the Norvani quickly turned into chaos as their own systems malfunctioned and their supply lines were cut. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The humans had already dismantled their offensive, turning their numbers against them. What unnerved the Norvani most was that the humans didn't fight with the same desperation they had seen in other species. There was no frantic struggle for survival, no last-ditch efforts to escape. The humans fought with precision, as if they had already calculated every possible outcome and knew exactly how to counter it. It was a level of confidence and control that the Norvani hadn't expected from a species they still considered primitive. By the end of the battle, the humans stood victorious once again. Zorith 9, a planet the Tarvok had written off as unimportant, was now a symbol of humanity's growing influence in the war. The Norvani forces were in full retreat, demoralized and defeated, while the human soldiers held their ground, preparing for the next challenge. Word of the human success spread quickly through the ranks of the Tarvok alliance. What had started as a reluctant conscription had turned into something far more dangerous. Humanity wasn't just surviving in the war, they were thriving. They were adapting faster than anyone had anticipated, and with each victory, they were gaining more respect, more recognition, and more power. The Tarvok leadership couldn't ignore the results any longer. Humans were no longer expendable, no longer a minor footnote in the grand galactic conflict. They had proven themselves capable of holding their own against the galaxy's most fearsome forces, and with each passing battle, their reputation grew. The humans, once thought to be a temporary solution to a desperate problem, were quickly becoming the most formidable force in the war. But for humanity, this was only the beginning. They hadn't asked to be part of this conflict, but now that they were in it, they were determined to emerge stronger. The galaxy had forced them into the war, and now it was beginning to realize the full weight of that decision. With every battle they fought, humanity was reshaping the future of the galaxy, and those who had underestimated them were starting to regret ever involving. As the war dragged on, Humanity's role became increasingly impossible to ignore. Their victories, initially seen as flukes, were becoming routine. The Tarvok Alliance could no longer dismiss them as simple foot soldiers. Each battle they fought brought new strategies, new tactics, and new innovations that left even the most experienced alien generals questioning everything they knew about warfare. Back on Earth and across the human colonies, military leaders were working tirelessly to improve their forces. They weren't content to just survive the war. They were determined to win. Every engagement was treated as a learning opportunity, with Earth's military constantly refining their techniques. Humans weren't just adapting to the enemy's tactics, they were evolving them. They modified weapons and vehicles, turning alien technology into something more efficient, more destructive, and far more effective in human hands than it ever had been in the hands of the original creators. It wasn't long before human-led offensives started shifting the balance of power in the war. In engagements where humans took command, the results were undeniable. Entire sectors, once seen as lost or irrelevant, were now back under the control of the Tarvok Alliance, thanks to human ingenuity. Their ability to think outside the box, to apply guerrilla tactics in space combat, and to turn every environment into an advantage caught everyone off guard. The galaxy had never seen a species so willing to throw conventional strategies out the window in favor of pure adaptability. Humanity's growing influence in the war was becoming a problem for the Tarvok leadership. Initially, humans had been assigned to secondary roles, but now they were leading operations that determined the outcome of entire campaigns. This caused tension within the Alliance's upper echelons. Some of the more traditional alien species were uncomfortable with how much power was being handed to humanity. They still saw humans as upstarts, a species that had only just entered the galactic stage. But others were pragmatic, recognizing that the humans were achieving results that no one else could. The Norvani Dominion, too, began to take note. At first, they had dismissed humanity as little more than a nuisance, an irritating force to be crushed. But after suffering multiple defeats at human hands, they started to understand that this new force wasn't something they could ignore. Their strategies shifted, diverting more resources to counter human-led forces. They even began developing technology specifically designed to counter human tactics, but it was a losing battle. For every new defense the Norvani created, the humans found a way around it, sometimes within days. There was a growing sense of frustration among the Norvani command. They were used to fighting wars of attrition, relying on overwhelming force and advanced technology to wear down their enemies. But humanity didn't play by those rules. The humans fought in ways the Norvani couldn't predict. Where the Norvani deployed massive, lumbering ships, humanity responded with small, fast-moving strike teams that tore through the gaps in their defenses. Where the Norvani built elaborate fortifications, the humans bypassed them entirely, using their knowledge of psychological warfare to undermine morale and disrupt the enemy from within. This wasn't just a physical battle, it was a mental one. The humans had learned long ago that wars weren't won solely with weapons. They were won by breaking the enemy's will to fight. And that was exactly what they were doing. The Norvani forces found themselves constantly on edge, unsure where the next attack would come from or how the humans would strike. Their soldiers began to dread facing human forces, knowing that every encounter could lead to something unexpected, something they weren't prepared for. The Tarvok commanders, watching the humans in action, began to adopt some of their tactics. Slowly, and with some reluctance, the more rigid alien officers started to realize that they couldn't win the war by relying on their traditional methods alone. They began incorporating human strategies into their own operations, trying to replicate the success that the human forces were achieving. But even as they did, there was an unspoken understanding. No matter how much they tried to copy the humans, they couldn't match them. Humanity's strength lay in its unpredictability, in its ability to think differently from the rest of the galaxy. The battlefield wasn't the only place where humanity was making waves. In the political arenas of the Tarvok Alliance, human representatives were beginning to assert themselves. They had earned a seat at the table, not through diplomacy, but through sheer competence. The other species in the Alliance, once dismissive of humanity's role, were starting to realize that they couldn't afford to ignore them anymore. Humanity had become too important, too essential to the war effort. But with that influence came growing tensions. Some factions within the alliance were uncomfortable with how much power humanity was gaining. They feared that once the war was over, the humans wouldn't just fade into the background. They would demand their place as equals, perhaps even superiors. Whispers of dissent began to circulate, with some alien leaders considering ways to curb humanity's rising influence before it was too late. Despite these tensions, humanity's rise continued unabated. In battle after battle, they proved that they were not only a match for the enemy, they were a step ahead. The war had transformed them. What had started as a forced conscription into an alien conflict had become something far greater. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for dominance, for recognition, and for the future of their species. It wasn't long before human forces were assigned to lead one of the most critical offensives of the war. A strategic system, deep within Norvani territory, held the key to shifting the balance of power permanently in favor of the Tarvok alliance. The alien leadership had been planning an assault on the system for years, but had been unable to devise a plan that guaranteed success. They entrusted the operation to human commanders, hoping that their unconventional approach would provide the breakthrough they needed. Human military leaders spent weeks preparing for the operation, studying the terrain, the enemy's movements, and every possible factor that could influence the battle. They knew that this wasn't just another engagement. This was the moment that would define humanity's role in the galaxy. If they succeeded, there would be no denying their place among the galactic powers. If they failed, everything they had worked for could be undone. But failure wasn't an option. The assault, when it came, was swift and decisive. Human forces used every trick they had learned throughout the war, from guerrilla tactics to psychological warfare. They hit the enemy from multiple fronts, confusing and overwhelming them. The Norvani defenders, despite their best efforts, couldn't hold the line. The humans pushed deeper into the system, capturing key objectives and dismantling the enemy's defenses one by one. By the time the dust settled, the system was under Tarvok control, and humanity had cemented its reputation as one of the most formidable military forces in the galaxy. Their success wasn't just a victory for the Alliance, it was a victory for humanity. They had proven that they didn't just belong in the war, they were shaping its outcome. The Tarvok leaders, even those who had once doubted humanity, couldn't deny the truth any longer. Humanity was no longer just a tool to be used in the war. They were a rising power, one that the galaxy would have to reckon with. And as the war continued to rage, it was becoming clear that the humans weren't fighting just for the Alliance. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy's future. The final push came faster than anyone had anticipated. After humanity's decisive victory in the strategic system deep within Norvani territory, the enemy forces were on the defensive. The Tarvok alliance, with humanity now at the forefront, began pressing their advantage, launching offensives on multiple fronts. Every victory emboldened them, but it was clear to everyone involved that the key to ending the war would be striking directly at the heart of the Norvani dominion. The Norvani, realizing their losses were mounting, made a desperate move. They shifted their focus entirely, preparing for an all-out attack on Earth. It was a bold and reckless strategy, one meant to break humanity's will by threatening their homeworld. The Norvani High Command believed that if they could destroy Earth, humanity would collapse under the weight of their loss. What they didn't understand was that humanity didn't fear annihilation. They had faced the threat of extinction before. The stakes had always been life or death, and the humans were not ones to back down when everything was on the line. As the Norvani fleet began its approach to Earth, the Tarvok alliance mobilized to intercept. But it was humanity, not the Tarvok, that took command of the defense. Earth was their home, and they would be the ones to defend it. Human fleets launched from every outpost, from every colony, converging on Earth with a ferocity that took even the Tarvok commanders by surprise. This wasn't just another battle to them. This was personal. When the Norvani fleet finally arrived in the Sol system, they were met with resistance far beyond what they had prepared for. The humans had fortified the area around Earth with a network of defenses that far surpassed what the Norvani had expected. They had spent years preparing for this moment, knowing that one day their enemies would come for them. Now, all that preparation was paying off. The Norvani commanders had expected a quick victory, a devastating blow that would cripple humanity's ability to fight. Instead, they were met with overwhelming force. Human ships, faster and more agile than anything the Norvani had seen before, tore through their ranks, using the full extent of Earth's defense network to their advantage. The space around Earth became a battleground, but it was clear from the outset that the Norvani were at a disadvantage. Human forces fought with a level of intensity that the Norvani simply couldn't match. Every human ship that went down took twice as many Norvani vessels with it. Human tactics, honed over years of unconventional warfare, left the Norvani reeling. They had come expecting to crush a planet. Instead, they were being pushed back by a species they had once considered beneath them. As the battle raged, it became clear to the Norvani that they were losing. Their fleet, which had once been the pride of their dominion, was being torn apart. Human ingenuity and sheer willpower were dismantling the Norvani forces piece by piece. But the Norvani weren't ready to give up yet. They prepared to launch a final assault, targeting Earth itself, hoping to at least deal a crippling blow to the planet's surface. It was then that humanity revealed the full extent of their preparedness. Earth's planetary defense systems, hidden beneath the surface and powered by technology repurposed from their alien enemies, activated. Massive cannons emerged from the depths of the planet, launching energy blasts that tore through the Norvani's remaining ships. The humans had taken the best of what they had learned from the Tarvok and the Norvani, improving upon it and turning it into something uniquely their own. The Norvani fleet, already struggling to hold its ground, was obliterated. The remnants of the Norvani forces, realizing they could not win, began to retreat. But the humans didn't let them go. They pursued, driving the Norvani back across the system, ensuring that none would return to threaten Earth again. It wasn't just about winning the battle, it was about sending a message. Humanity wasn't a victim, nor were they a minor player in the Galactic War. They were a force to be reckoned with, one that could not be intimidated or defeated by conventional means. Back on Earth, celebrations erupted as the human forces returned victorious. But the mood among humanity's leaders was not one of satisfaction. It was one of grim determination. The Norvani had targeted their home, and while they had successfully defended it, they knew that as long as the war continued, Earth would never be safe. Humanity had always fought for survival, but now they were fighting for something more. They were fighting to end the war on their terms, to ensure that no alien power would ever again threaten them. The Tarvok Alliance, witnessing the destruction of the Norvani fleet and the strength of Earth's defense, realized something important. They had once conscripted humanity into the war as a last-ditch effort to bolster their own ranks. Now, humanity was the reason they were still winning. The humans were no longer just soldiers. They were commanders, innovators, and the deciding factor in the war's outcome. But this realization came with its own set of problems. The Tarvok leaders, many of whom had once looked down on humanity, now saw them as a potential threat. They had unleashed a power they couldn't control, and it was becoming clear that humanity would not settle for returning to their previous status. They had proven themselves not just in battle but in strategy and leadership, and the Tarvok knew that once the war was over, they would have to deal with the consequences of humanity's rise. The Norvani Dominion, now crippled and on the verge of collapse, was forced into retreat on every front. Their leadership scrambled to regroup, but the damage had already been done. They had underestimated humanity from the beginning, and now they were paying the price. Their once mighty empire was crumbling, and with every defeat, humanity grew stronger. As the war approached its final stages, it was humanity who led the charge. No longer content to merely defend their home, they took the fight to the Norvani heartlands, dismantling their infrastructure and crushing their remaining forces. The Tarvok Alliance followed humanity's lead, but it was clear to everyone involved that the humans were the ones dictating the terms of the war now. By the time the Norvani Dominion finally surrendered, it wasn't the Tarvok Alliance they feared, it was humanity. They had gone from being a reluctant participant in the war to its dominant force. And as the dust settled and peace talks began, the rest of the galaxy knew that things would never be the same. The war had forced humanity onto the galactic stage, And now that they were there, they had no intention of stepping back. The Tarvok Alliance, once the most powerful coalition in the galaxy, now had to reckon with the fact that humanity had surpassed them. And while the peace was fragile, one thing was certain: humanity had earned their place, and no one would ever underestimate them again. The galaxy had forced humans into the war, and now they would have to live with the consequences.